I want to begin my talk today with a question, and I want you to take a moment and really deeply think about it. What would it mean for you to be successful? And by that I mean, what are the tangible accomplishments that would have to happen for you to view yourself like that? For me, I've spent a lot of time contemplating this question throughout my life because I've been pretty obsessed with the definition of success. And I don't use the word obsessed lightly. I want to paint you a picture of a younger me. That's me when I was in 5th grade. And one day, I'm out here on my recess field. My friends are laughing and talking over in another part of the field, and I'm by the fence by myself crying. And my teacher comes over and she says, "Catie, what's wrong? What's happening?" And I said, I got an 88 on my science test. And for me, that truly did feel like the end of the world. And you might be thinking it's silly or crazy or both for a 10-year-old to be that upset about a B on a test. But for me, it was a big deal because it felt like I had failed. And if I had failed, then I was a failure. And if I was a failure, then I couldn't succeed. And this kind of all or nothing thinking didn't just stop there. It kept being built up throughout my life. I've moved around a fair bit during my life. That's a picture of me and my siblings in uniform at our school in England, which I moved to the year after that story I just told. And that's me and my brother on the first day of school here in Portland, Oregon, where I moved for high school. And both of these schools were pretty competitive environments. And I got used to thinking of success in this very binary way, of getting good grades, of seeming perfect on the outside, of just accomplishing at any cost. And I fell into this method of what I like to call black and white thinking. And I used an example of that when I told that story about 4th grade, that if I wasn't succeeding, then I was a failure. And I got this message as I moved to that accomplishments were equal to my success. Because in different ways over the years, whether it was in my 5th grade class, where I wrote a funny story and made my peers laugh, or in my 10th grade class, where I wrote a persuasive speech and prompted thought-provoking conversation, I got the message that what I did was how I belonged in different places. And for some people, that might have been a reinforcement of their own self-reliance. But for me, it felt like what I accomplished was equal to my success, and that my success was equal to my worth. And I also got this message that I had to seem perfect on the outside, that success was equal to invulnerability. And that's where this kind of binary thinking starts to fall apart, because success wasn't equal to invulnerability for me. As I went into high school, I started seeing how my peers and people around me put these caveats on their success, that they were willing to sacrifice parts of themselves to be successful. It was usual to hear my peers in the hallway talking about how little sleep they'd gotten the night before to turn in an essay, or how they hadn't had time to eat in a day because they were studying for a test. And so in that vein, my peers weren't succeeding in this kind of effortless way that I thought they were. People were sacrificing their own physical and mental wellness to succeed. And the data backs this up. This study identified 12 sources of adolescent kind of factors that affect adolescent wellness. And the 3 that I think are relevant today are racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, and other discrimination, excessive pressure to excel, and systems that can lift up or undermine. And I just talked about the excessive pressure to excel that I'd felt in different environments throughout my life. But let's dig into the parts that are systems that can lift up or undermine, and racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, and other discrimination. So these independent schools that I've gone to were founded by and for straight white men. So anyone who doesn't check those boxes is effectively functioning in an environment that wasn't made for them. More than that, we're expected to succeed in those environments. And there's a cost to that. And this is where I started rooting these kind of thinking about success back to my own experiences. I remember the story of when I was in a breakout room earlier this year, when my school was virtual, and I was expressing some frustration over something that had happened in a class before. I was talking about how I had been in my history class and I had made a point, and it had been ignored by people around me, and 15 minutes later, a guy in my class had made the same point and was taken seriously. And the other girl in my breakout room was like, "Oh, yes, that's happened to me too, like I identify with that." But the guy in my breakout room was floored. He was just shocked. He was just flabbergasted that anything like that could have happened. He was like, "Are you sure no one took into account your point?" And I was confused at first why he didn't understand how frequent those kind of interactions were in our classrooms. But then I realized, one, he probably had some privilege that barred him from seeing that, and two, the women in my life and I might have talked about that with each other, but we didn't call it out in classrooms because to call it out in classrooms would be to go against some of the ways that we are cultured. So boys are prompted for critical thinking and deeper thought from a young age, and girls are praised for quietness and neatness from a pretty young age. So not only are we going against our own conditioning there, we might be compromising our place within a classroom, our social standing, even our grade if our teacher doesn't like what we say. And this isn't unique to my school or the people that I know. Teachers overall spend 2/3 more time interacting with boys than with girls. And high school science teachers are 43% more likely to spend time explaining basic concepts to boys than to girls. And this socialization that I was talking about, where girls are praised from a young age for being neat and quiet, that also has an impact on how we learn as we get older. Girls are 3 times less likely to be diagnosed with ADHD than boys because they don't exhibit the same kind of symptoms, and that's a direct result of their and our kind of conditioning and our socialization in our society. And so as I started thinking about that, and as I started kind of tracking the sexism I and my friends had experienced throughout my high school career, I also started seeing something that my privilege had barred me from seeing before, which is that these kind of areas of discrimination are compounded, especially for students of color, and especially for women of color. Because this doesn't stop when we're in high school. As we grow up, we're still expected to function in these very binary ways of how to be a woman. So if you Google successful women, you come up with overwhelmingly white, thin, and women who walk this narrow line between being too masculine and too feminine. And I think that's really well represented with a blazer and heels, so that you can, command attention in a boardroom or something like that, but not so much as to threaten any of the men there, which is why I'm wearing this today, to seem successful as well, instead of what I usually wear. And when we talk about this kind of socialization of women and the way that women are expected to exist and function in these very binary ways that we're socialized to exist in, this is compounded for girls of color. Girls of color are 6 times more likely to be punished in school or be perceived as deviant or defiant. And they have a lot more experiences with discrimination in the form of racism. And a lot of the time we think of racism as this abstract kind of thing that happens all the time in different spaces and just is something inherent to our society. And that's not exactly true. Racism really is the intersection of race and ethnicity and stress. And specifically these kind of racism-related stresses. Episodic, which is like direct racial discrimination, daily, which are racial microaggressions, and chronic, which is unequal access. And all of those happen on a daily basis within my school, where there are microaggressions by teachers, by students, and there's systemic unequal access. And so not only are women and people of color discriminated against within classroom environments, marginalized students on the whole don't see themselves represented in our curriculums either. And if these children want to attend an elite college, their best bet by far is to spend their adolescence in a school where the experience of being black is for many a painful one. That's a quote from an Atlantic op-ed on independent schools, just about the nature of sacrifice by students of color to be in these environments, to succeed or keep being on a successful path at cost to their own mental and physical wellness. But like I said, this doesn't just stop with this silencing within classrooms or this kind of sacrifice that they feel when they're in their learning environments. This happens within our very curriculum. When we look at queer education and the history of LGBTQ people in the United States, 3 states in our country, Texas, Alabama, and South Carolina, actively bar teachers from saying anything about this history. They aren't allowed to talk about it within their classrooms. And the only state that mandates education on LGBTQ+ history is California. So we see that students are silenced within their classrooms, but they're also not represented within their curriculum, so they're not able to see themselves reflected anywhere in their classrooms at some points. And so as I was doing this research and compiling this data, I was kind of realizing the extent to which these had affected my life. And I think this other quote from the Atlantic article represents this well, that kids in schools like these are being taught terrible values, that hypocrisy and dishonesty are fine so long as you virtue signal the right fashionable politics. Because no competitive environment, whether that be a workplace or a school, is ever going to outright say that they have these areas of discrimination. But ask anyone who's been the victim of that and they'll tell you the truth. And I had talked about this, I had questioned it, and that's why it's our responsibility to question these environments, to hold these schools and these workplaces accountable. But I had realized I didn't take that extra step. I had questioned these environments, I had talked to my friends, I had talked to some trusted people in my life, but I had never done what I do outside of school. Outside of school, I do a lot of activism and advocacy work. I work on racial justice, climate justice, voter enfranchisement, and to succeed in that kind of work, you really have to be unafraid to speak truth to power and to hold accountable these systems that are standing in the way of progress. So I'm accustomed to saying in my speeches, I want to build a better world. My friends and I deserve to live in a better world when we're older. But I realized to build that better world, we need to do that right now. And for me, doing that right now meant confronting that within my independent school. But before I could do that, I had to confront my own metrics of perfectionism and success within myself. So I realized that I had these standard kind of limits on perfectionism, not just in my academic life, but also in my personal life. Activities that were supposed to be self-care for me became pressure-filled and stressful, like art. So for a bit of this year, I only let myself draw with Crayola crayons, the kind you would use back in kindergarten. And the thing about drawing with these crayons is if you make a mistake, you can't go back, you can't erase. You just have to embrace it as part of the picture and move on. And I thought that was a pretty good metaphor for how I wanted to live my life and accept mistakes within my life instead of feeding into my very black and white thinking about success. And as I was doing this exercise, I really processed that if I was feeling this way, other students must be feeling this way as well, especially students who had even more intersecting identities than I did that were discriminated against within the classroom. So I knew I had to do something on the systemic level, which is why my friends and I founded the Anti-Racism Collective at our school. And our mission is to hold our school accountable and make our school a more anti-racist place. And to do this, we had to change how we existed in our school environments. We couldn't be silent in classrooms when microaggressions happened. We couldn't just kind of sit back and take that easy way out, even if it would be easier for our own success, or if we would be perceived as more successful to others. We had to really and truly hold people in our school accountable. And we've done that, and we've made some really long-lasting change at our school, which I'm really proud of. So as I finish telling you my story and my journey with success, I ask you to return to the question I asked you at the beginning of this presentation. What would it take for you to be successful? And for me, I realized that after doing all of that work internally and externally, I had to redefine that for myself. Instead of just depending on grades or accomplishments to dictate my self-worth, I came up with this definition. Success is when I can wake up every day and no matter what happened the day before, feel okay about myself. And as I stopped relying on those grades and accomplishments, this is what I came up with. And I hope that when you start investigating the things that you thought about at the beginning of this presentation, those concrete, tangible metrics of what would make you successful, you dig into what those actually mean to you. For me, grades were a reflection of my intelligence, which I was insecure about. What does that promotion at work, that losing weight, mean to you? How can you redefine your own success? I think that when you do that, you might be surprised at what success really means to you. Thank you.